One sec. Hello!
Hello. Hello.
Welcome back to Footnotes over here at Stories to D4. I'm super excited to, for the first time here, introduce Amanda. Welcome, Amanda.
Hi. I'm really happy to be here. It's really fun to get to talk to y'all about D&D and Gwynwen.
Now, before we get started jumping into, I would say, a pretty crazy session we had this week.
Yeah.
I want to really quickly thank our wonderful new subscribers. We couldn't do that without your support, and we really appreciate it as we're starting to grow as a channel. We have here our dear friend Jayhawk795. Thank you so much. We've got Captain Moist, which I have to say I got to see more than my fair share of players grimace at your name. I appreciate it. You keep things moist. Moving on, we got Gamble NB. Thank you, Gamble. We have Ektax. I'm not sure if I got that pronunciation right.
ECAT-TX?
Is it ECAT? I think it's Ektax, which sounds like either a candy or a drug. Either way, you should be doing it on the show. We also have Jake Frost 12, Sentinel 5, and our dear buddy Kreifer. Thank you guys so much, and I'm sure I butchered no less than 75% of those names. Anywho, I know you didn't come here just to see that. You want to talk about last session before we get into the juicy D&D topics of the week? You had a very large combat.
We did.
Is it our first big combat for this campaign?
Yeah, it was a big combat, but it was also an interesting first one.
Yeah, because we didn't want to kill anybody. We were trying to prevent all death, including like the people we were fighting.
And yourself.
Right,
and
ourselves.
You kind of sort of greedily seem to want to be alive. And I've put up with that for now, but hey, don't expect this kindness to go on forever. Let me pull up here. We should be, our audio should be good, but I just want to check as well.
I think we're good.
Now, that guard fight, you fought against a group of compelled guards. It wasn't difficult individually for you to handle them, but it was kind of in a dark sort of situation, having to keep them away from an enchanted painting.
Well, we did light it up pretty quickly with a grease fire.
Let's put the session summary on hold and talk about the grease fire. Now, in our previous campaigns, both before, Amanda, you joined us, and after, there were a number of times that you woke up in the morning and arson was your choice. Like, that was the decision you made for your day.
Yeah.
During sieges, handling petty crime, arson has been a theme. Now, you're not murder hobos, but you certainly have a disrespect for the front half of taverns.
Yeah, we fought sexism with fire, which...
As you do.
As you do, but...
Sure, okay, that's actually fair, I suppose. Now, once you successfully stopped the guards of Coppersbeck from actually proceeding in towards the painting, you had some drama, which you can check out on our session 4. You had some drama over with Mr. Thorne, who appeared quite affected by the magics.
Yeah.
After the funeral, after making sure Thorne was no longer magically compelled, you actually hit the road and have left Coppersbeck and are now on the King's Road to the capital. I'm really excited. I'm hoping, Amanda, do you like to share today some of why you personally, why Gwynwen is thinking about going that direction?
So Gwynwen and Silas actually have a third childhood best friend. So Gwynwen and Silas have been friends for many decades, over 50 at this point. And they have a human friend named Chester who's already in Elves.
Okay, so we're heading towards Elves, and I suppose I shouldn't pretend surprise. We did talk a little bit beforehand. But there's kind of two parts of this. First, when doing character creation, it's so wonderful having players who are interested in having these sort of background non-player characters. And there's multiple ways you can handle them. You could, of course, use them as sort of quest. Let's go get on the road and go visit our dear friend. Or you could murder them and use them as a plot point. Don't do that second one too much. I'm a big proponent of, if you get 10 NPCs from your players, you shouldn't be killing more than maybe one of them.
Yeah, try to leave some people alive for story purposes, maybe?
It's why players with friends and family, they're really good they're very easy to role play with, not because of violence, not because you can hurt or traumatize people, but because they give people who can send you letters motivation to protect a given area. And in Chester's case, the motivation both to tie together two characters, Silas and Gwynwyn, and to get somewhere. You have a very clear little side quest going on.
Having a fleshed out background or backstory also makes it really easy to role play a character, because now you have a lot of people will build out lone wolf characters. I've played them, everybody's got one at least, but it's really fun to have somebody who you can either, you can answer to some degree. And
everyone wants to be Batman.
Everybody, yeah. I love it. It's very fun, and I recommend everybody try it once. But it's also fun to have, because I came in with, I've said it before, I came in with this massive sheet of background. I'm like, this is my sister, this is my brother, let's go back 3 generations. No, you don't always have to do that either, but having these different ties to the world makes your character, once you start, because starting a new campaign can be a little bit kind of nerve-wracking sometimes.
You don't always know what to do, where to go with it.
Yeah, and so having these background characters means that you can kind of lean on that and have these pre-built relationships. And there is, I know I keep talking about Bubble Gumshoes, but in that rule set for it's a Gumshoes-based game, you actually have in-character creation, creating relationships with, you have to have relationships to play the game. It's part of the design. And
we actually took that. Now, Victoria has some experience a little bit with Bubble Gumshoe, and we're hoping to maybe have that on the channel someday, if you're interested. And we actually, in character creation, all of the players, we limited the amount of backstory. We didn't want it to be a big tome, a massive binder of backstory. But every character has 3 characters that are in their backstory. 3 non-player characters who matter. They can have a little more, they can have a little less. But this just rough guideline really helped. It helped from me on the DM side. Now with Ismini and Gwynwyn, we talked about Chester already. How are you feeling about having that sort of small framework in building your backstory?
It's really nice because you have somebody you can go back to. You can think about, oh, I know how my character had this relationship with this character when it reacted in this situation, and you can apply that to another situation. And
the having 2 different groups that are connected, I think, is really interesting too. So I've got Elle and you've got Silas, and us having this, we already have somebody in the group that we trust. So many parties start out and everybody's a stranger, which is fun.
Or everyone knows each other already.
Yeah. Or
the nebulous 5-man group.
Yeah. So having either that start out where you know everybody or nobody knows anybody's, we've done both now. And I really like this where we've got kind of the odd man out with Thorn, but we've also got these. I know that with my person that I came with, I have this one person in the group that I can trust to help me make decisions or lean on.
You've actually used your connection with Elle not just to roleplay with Clella, Elle's player, but you've also, when Clella's been absent, they've had to step away, or if Elle is somewhere else in the campaign, you've used that as a way to bond with other players. You had an emotional moment privately, not with Elle, last time, which I thought was really was a fun bit of role playing.
And I also have to explain that I'm in love with Gwynwyn, because you are. And
you heard it here first, shippers.
Yeah, sorry, I'm going to say that all the time though, because you've come in and from somebody who used to play a redheaded dwarf to somebody who is playing a redheaded dwarf, thank you. So as a character, I have had to come up with why am I already so attached to Gwynwyn. And honestly, because you are smart and you helped me with Elle, so you're great in my books. Like, that's been a really fun thing to have, too. Because now I come into this like, oh, no, I'm already, like, I'm emotionally attached to everybody else's characters and we haven't even rolled dice yet. How do I deal with that? Okay, let me see how I can make that connection.
Yeah.
You know, it's a good thing you brought up your previous dwarf. In our last campaign, you did play a dwarf, and now, of course, we have Amanda taking on the mantle of the stocky yet short. And so, you want to talk a little bit about dwarves in Dungeons and Dragons?
Please. Yeah.
So, they're obviously dwarves themselves. They've got some folklore. They've got some Tolkien. There's a lot of different ways that we can adapt them. In our setting, we took a little bit, and I think we changed some as well. We had kind of a fun difference between, or rather, I think it's fun to to see a dwarf in a heroic setting either as a representative of their group, of their culture, or are often used as a stark contrast to that. Yeah. And I think both of your characters have done that in one way or another.
Yeah, I would say that, because I played around with a dwarf before I played in our first campaign. I had done it at Adventurers League at a local store.
Go to your LGSs. They're pretty great.
They're great. But I got to play in Adventurers League. This was far before, But I played somebody who was very much the prototypical idea of a dwarf. And then whenever I moved to our first campaign, I said, I want to just break all of the rules. I want to be chaotic good. I want to be a bard. I want to be a pirate. Like, I just went all in on let's break all of the dwarven rules. But by doing that, it kind of even helped further define what dwarves are in our setting, because we're not playing on the Forgotten Realms, Sword Coast kind of adventure,
or even Galarian.
We're not playing on Galarian.
There's a lot of differences from dwarven. And Gwynwyn, you're an alchemist, which is definitely not in our normal archetype for that. Would you mind telling me a little bit about why? Oh, not why. I love her. But tell me a little bit about those, just the decisions that went into that.
So, I picked Artificer because I wanted to be not melee. I played Jeswyn before, who was a paladin, and I kind of forgot she had spells, besides smiting. I kind of forgot most days she had spells.
There are a lot of people in the chat on Twitter at Wizards of the Coast who may argue that playing a paladin who mainly uses their smite is optimal. It's very strong.
It's very strong.
Fair. And then I also played a barbarian in our Helves campaign.
Yeah.
And so I did a lot of swing sword, swing big weapon. And so I said, I want to be a caster, but I don't want to be a wizard because I would try to emulate Ebro too much. That was my fear.
So you actually went with a half caster.
So I went half caster because
okay.
I do like swinging a sword. I like having the option to swing something at someone. If I'm like, I'm just tired of you, I'm going to swing something heavy at you and hit you. So I went with Artificer because Jake actually played an Artificer before, and I said that seemed interesting.
And he was our sort of resident gun daddy, if you will.
Yeah.
Now he did a few chaos spells every once in a while and caused a lot of chaos. And I said,
battlefield control, breaking buildings.
Exactly.
Rope Trick was another party member for us, it felt like some days, because 2 people had Rope Trick, and we were just like, oh, our wizard and our artificer are gone now.
Hide rope.
Yeah.
If you can get away with it, fellow DMs, just maybe don't trust your party members with the rope or magic. You can have one or the other, and honestly, they're kind of even on my scales.
I mean, but if you don't have magic, then Rope Trick isn't a thing. So
exactly. Well, that's what I'm saying. You can have one or the other.
Okay.
Now, something you'll be seeing here this upcoming week, you both just hit level 3.
Yes.
And now, generally speaking, for the full casters, like Ismini, like wizards in general, they get every odd level new spell levels. You've played half caster before, but really as a melee character. Being more magic focused now, you're not getting a new spell level. How does that feel in that progression?
Like, to me, that's fine because I haven't played a full caster yet. So I don't see a difference. I'm like, oh, yeah, I don't get more spells. That's fine.
Yeah, your only full caster experience was in our one-shot with Gliara.
The level 20 bard who already had all of her spells. I didn't experience gaining power in that.
True.
And I want to go back to that also because I really like in our setting and what we've been doing with our campaigns and our mini, 3-shot mini-series kind of
mini-series.
things. We do some of those, and the connections that our characters have had over time, just as we've been playing out these different campaigns and the relationships between them, I've really loved that there's been a continuous through line where our characters kind of circle around on each other.
And it also, so one thing about playing in multiple campaigns with each other both from a world building standpoint and a meta standpoint. From a world-building standpoint, when you're playing in the same setting with those same people, you really get to know the nitty-gritty of the various races. So with our dwarves, we've talked before in our previous campaigns about, what dwarves eat.
I know
you know.
what they eat. I know kind of, like, we've come up with religious ceremonies. We had a wedding.
You had a wedding.
The engagement as well. We described how you get engaged.
Yeah, so we've really...
A lot of blushing.
A lot of blushing.
A lot of blushing.
A lot of blushing. But it's been really fun to dive in so far into a culture and kind of help create it. And I'm really excited to see where it goes, too, because we're on a different... You came from a different country than I did. Yep. And so there's going to be different customs, and it's going to be fun.
Oh, and names as well.
Yeah.
So that... And we'll move on from dwarves, I think, from here. Maybe.
Maybe.
It's hard.
No. There's 2 dwarves right now.
Well, we don't have a full dwarven language or anything overly complex like that. We do have some internal naming systems. There are a couple names that you might recognize from previous heroes, kings, important dwarves that may show up in later points in the setting. But also, we have the kingdoms themselves. All of the dwarven kingdoms you've interacted with, you recognize as they all have the same. So in our setting, they have the same prefix. There's Gor Adan, Gor Barim, Gor Thum. All of those brought together. They can arrive in a new region and not just roll history checks when they learn about a new place, but also IRL history checks. They've been here. Yeah. You've experienced that setting together.
You show me a new map and I laser focus in on the Gor. I'm like, oh, so there's a dwarven kingdom here. Great.
Yep.
It's really fun to have that, and kind of as we're building this world out, have the ability to look at new places and see something that for us as players feels familiar. Because I think, you know, growing up playing games like Baldur's Gate for you, Neverwinter Nights for me, we recognize a lot of these Sword Coast names, a lot of the books that are published by Wizards of the Coast in these locations. And getting to start to grow that familiarity with a setting that we've been playing in now for a few years has been an absolute blast, honestly, because I was always like, oh, you know, I know Neverwinter, I know they're the ports, and now we've got these new cities that have that same kind of expansive, massive feel to them, but are built by us. I like it a lot. I think it's really great.
So we haven't had you on Footnotes before.
Yeah,
let's talk a little. We've done this each week with our players, and we have finally Amanda. Amanda, tell me a little bit about your experience with Dungeons and Dragons. Where'd you start? Were you born with some clickety-clackety math rocks in your hand?
I think probably the newest to Dungeons and Dragons at this table. Because the first time I really played D&D was when Clella did her campaign with you two and Lauren.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was... Lauren DM'd a campaign before us, but Lauren, that was her first time DMing. It was my first campaign. We had another newbie.
That sounds delightful.
Our first campaign was a murder mystery with rats were the answer, and it was fun, but also we were dumb and did not succeed very well in that.
Rats are the answer. Where are my DM notes?
But then, so that died very quickly, but then Clella's campaign was kind of the first session I did. And...
Oh. I want to pause real quick before we continue talking about that. I want to mention something right here, right now. If you haven't been playing D&D, that's totally fine. There's lots of wonderful folks playing who'd love to have you come and sit at the table. If you want to come and join us on Fridays, Mr. Jurassic, we have a table. We'd love to have a drink, sit down, and watch the show. We've got some fun stuff going on here, and there's always your local LGS.
Yeah, and yell loudly in the chat when we make mistakes, because
yeah, if you want to yell at people
all the time. But it is that thing that I wanted to say. I was not sure I was going to like Dungeons and Dragons whenever I started. I was so against it.
She said no when I asked, actually.
Multiple times. And you finally kind of like convinced me, no, it's actually just kind of look kind of fun. Like, well, because no, you were like, no, like you play Warhammer. You play Warhammer 40K.
I have been outed publicly.
So, going to the local gaming stores and finding somebody, I know that right now you might not be able to find anything like that, but there are...
It goes without saying, but let's say it anyways. Be careful.
Yeah.
Be safe.
Right.
We're talking about a more general life.
Yes, and a general life thing being, if finding that community, it can be very hard too, I know. If I didn't have somebody to go with me, I don't know if I would have started as fast as I did from when I decided that I liked the idea. But if it gets to the point where you can go to a local gaming store, there's all sorts of places to go to that they run games every week. You go in, they help you build your character. I had a great time that first time that I went, even though I was very new to it, didn't know all the rules. kind of nerve-wracking, but also some of the most fun that I've had.
We actually have a young player in chat talking about maybe not having access to a big group or being able to get to stores. In that sort of situation, when you don't have access to some of these options, I do want to, let's talk a little bit about what it takes to get to D&D. And I promise we're going to come back to where you started.
Yeah, we'll wrap around.
Here on Footnotes, we really want to engage when we've got these folks here telling us about this. If you don't have access to a local game store, completely understand. They're not in every city. They're not in every country, and that's an important thing to know.
Yeah.
But there are other options. Dungeons and Dragons, if you have access to internet, the basic rules are available for free. They're what's called the SRD, and with those basic rules, if you have siblings, parents, or friends that live nearby, you're able to play without any sort of monetary investment. You don't have to go somewhere fancy. You don't have to get a big, complicated table and devote a room to it. All you need is one other person, so yourself and one other person, some pen, some paper, and some dice. I don't think anything else. I think we talked about this in a previous Footnotes, but I think that's really all you need to get started.
And honestly, you can Google roll a d6, roll a d20.
You can't. True. The dice themselves are optional.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. We've done digital dice rolling before, especially we're trying to figure out something. So we were just like, okay, let's just put all of this into Google instead of us sitting there gathering all of the dice and rolling them a bunch of times. It was for something ridiculous.
Connor, in his last character, had a magic weapon that gave a lot of extra dice. Rolled crits pretty often, and even had some oils he could apply for extra dice.
And smites.
So, when you're rolling 15 dice, online is a great option, and again, you don't have to spend any money. D&D is something that doesn't have to cost a lot of money. You don't need a lot of people, and though we play longer games, you don't actually have to have a lot of time. And so, Amanda, you talked about playing a little bit with Lauren, and you actually talked about playing with us a little bit later when Clilla ran their campaign. It was when you first joined us, if I remember correctly, it was originally not planned. It was planned as a sort of temporary thing.
Yes.
You joined with Jake, and we kind of all fell in love with their dynamic. What was it like coming in with another player?
That really helped. I think if I had just come in by myself, that would have been incredibly nerve-wracking.
Even with Clilla.
Even knowing Clilla, because I didn't really know anybody else. I mean, I knew you and Victoria, but I didn't know Connor, didn't know Jason. And so coming in also as a very new player to D&D and then coming into a campaign that's well established is hard.
For sure.
But then having Jake, who was also like, I don't know what they're referencing, was very helpful. We Discorded a lot, being like, do you know that name? Anytime y'all would bring up names, especially in the beginning.
Yeah. And I have to say, again, I mentioned it before, I'll say it again. I know that you know Clilla, you've known Clilla for years, but again, in my brain, so many times, the one word was Jake and Amanda. Watching you again.
Jamanda is for sure some of the essence. If you're an alchemist at home and want to build a potion of stories, to do so, you will need a Jamanda, and so it's very, very useful to have so.
And I'm so glad you guys joined. That was such a blast in the middle.
Our links, I do apologize. We actually have someone being very helpful in chat here. First, I want to say, Dragonborn Bard, absolutely fantastic idea. The classes work together. And honestly, who doesn't like a singing lizard?
So I believe,
that's great.
I believe that links need to be approved potentially by a moderator right now. I don't know I think we've turned off direct linking in the chat.
Okay.
So it may be in a queue.
So thank you so much, Caitlin. I do want to really quickly, just a couple pitches, maybe going alongside with what she had in mind here. There's a website called Roll20. It's free to play, and people actually post their games up on there. But it for sure it can be difficult finding games online. We've had people we've played with finding games locally. We've had people we've played with online. There's a lot of tools out there, and the biggest thing is if it's something that you want to do, putting a little bit of time every once in a while, looking for games online we eventually got it figured out, and we think you can too.
Yeah, but I did see that Discord is currently blocked, so it may be a little bit more difficult to find a game for that particular.
So Roll20 does have its own internal
chat.
postings.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And I think I've seen some resources before for younger players as well.
Okay. Well, so we actually have because to compensate for me skipping out on a previous week, I have 2 sort of fiddly rules today.
All right. I'm ready to argue with you, but be wrong.
Oh, I am fully excited because now, Amanda, I know I ran one of these past you, but I don't think I told Victoria.
I don't know them.
So there are 2 of these. One of these is more of just that's kind of weird that they work, and the other one is one where we're going to argue about a house rule. What would you like first?
What's the one that's going to make me argue more?
Let's argue about a house rule.
Great.
So one thing I want to mention that is a very common house rule, to the point that I've actually seen a lot of dungeon masters and players alike who believe that it's a base rule in 5th edition, is the idea of stacking advantage. So in 5th edition, sometimes context or an ability or a spell will allow you to roll multiple dice and either take the higher or the lower of that d20 roll. Rules is written in 5th edition from the core rulebook. If multiple situations affect a roll and each one grants advantage or imposes disadvantage on it, you don't roll more than 1 additional d20. Additionally, when you have a source of advantage and a source of disadvantage, regardless of how many of each of these sources you may have, you roll a single d20. So that's a base rule that advantage and disadvantage you don't stack up continuously. Now, I will mention for a lot of online streams you may have seen here at Stories. I've seen this on numerous others. There's always we should address Critical Role does play with the same house rule that we'll use here, which is we do allow, if I have 3 sources of advantage and 1 source of disadvantage, we do let you have that single advantage on that roll. Where do you both stand on this? I know you've played at my tables, but I'm curious on this specific rule.
I like the idea of sitting there and going, okay, I've got advantage from this, disadvantage from this, advantage from this, disadvantage from this, but then I've got another source of disadvantage, so I have disadvantage. I like that because it is, I don't know, maybe it's because I'm kind of enjoying Pathfinder rules, and it feels more like that little argumentative, tiny, okay, let me add this source, remove this source. I like that. I get the idea of if you've got both things helping you and hurting you, making it a flat roll is just easier, so you don't just sit there and argue over all the different sources.
Jayhawk asks, if I have my bird distract while my mage hand is helping and Kevril is flanking, do I have advantage? Yes, Jayhawk, you absolutely do.
You absolutely do.
Thank you as always for stopping by. Jayhawk is one of our dear friends, and actually, one of the characters he created is a very important NPC who you just might meet on a future session of Stories to D4.
What?
We'll talk about that in the future.
No.
Going back to
drops these things on
advantage and disadvantage. Now,
disadvantage.
If you were to take away this house rule and play this rules as written, there are some pros and cons. On the pro side, if you have a very if you have a very combat focused thing, having our stacking house rule does allow well prepared players to very strongly stack the deck in their favor. So, for example, they know bad things are coming, they get themselves several sources of advantage, and the enemies using darkness to their advantage is now a moot point. But also, enemies can be just as well prepared, if not more, than players.
Yeah. That was that conversation we previously had about, having your enemies learn about your players, and over time, especially if you've got a major antagonist, learning more about the party that they're going up against. I like the idea of counting them out and trying to figure out which one wins, because I just like the idea of being rewarded for players.
Small counting.
Yes.
5th edition, a lot less counting, a lot less numbers than some of the other editions. Not a bad thing necessarily. In this, but counting an advantage and disadvantage is, I think, a low enough ask that it can add a little bit of fun if you want. But before you ever try to use this sort of rule at your table, always be sure to talk with your DM, or if you're a DM out there thinking about using this house rule, always talk with your players before implementing a house rule, in my opinion.
I like it.
Yeah.
Especially when, especially it makes points of exhaustion matter now, because you can't do something like, flanking and now I can have a neutral roll. Or now you have that disadvantage. You have to think about when you have disadvantages as well. You have to be like, okay, how can I get advantage? I work my way up to flanking. Can I get myself to advantage?
I'm exhausted. It's pitch black and I don't have dark vision. Someone has broken my arm, but I've got magic on my side. There's lots of, I have to agree, it allows more penalties to be applied and still be relevant.
Right.
Yeah.
I like rewarding people for thinking through, because in D&D you can go into a combat without a plan.
I mean, have you met Jake? I have not found that I've been able to. Yeah, I will put you on blast, bro.
We would plan for an hour and a half, and then none of us would follow the plan whatsoever. It would get abandoned immediately.
Anytime we spent more than an hour planning, I said, we are not going to follow this plan at all. This
Oh
plan
no!
is going thrown
Let's
away.
take a moment to say, I hope the kiddos, the kiddos are able to get that new bed very soon, and that you can get some more books on your shelf. You never need more D&D books, but gosh, I do want them sometimes.
I'm so excited about the new bunny race.
Not sponsored.
Yeah, I'm so excited about the new bunny. No, not
sponsored.
Not sponsored, but I like the new bunny race from the Feywild.
Yeah,
I'm so excited to play a bunny race.
I cannot wait for us to get a physical copy of this new book in our hands. We should have a Footnotes where we discuss those in the future.
Yeah, because there's a couple books coming out. I just found out about another one today where the CR is going to be pretty
Increased challenge rating stuff.
Very high challenge rating.
Yeah, I'm a big
Beyond
fan.
Yeah, high CR. So I'm really excited to see that too, because we've done like little sessions before, little fight clubs basically, where we non-canonically fought a big monster. Tiamat was fun.
You did.
That was really fun.
There's and we'll be seeing it here in the channel in the future. Sometimes it's fun to run a true blue just encounter, a big, strong monster thrown at the parties. For you DMs who may have been painting a model that was going to sit at the top of the Citadel, but your players instead decided to go search somewhere else. Yeah. Sometimes it's fun to sit down and throw dice at a big, angry piece of plastic.
Yeah, it's fun, and I liked that we got to do the Tiamat fight specifically. We kind of were running characters from across our experience playing D&D as well, because we were not sure what all we needed. So I'm like, I'm going to bring two of my characters. Yeah,
you let us have the level 20s from our one shot and our regular characters.
So that it was a 9-on-1 with a boosted Tiamat, which I would say was a pretty even fight.
Yeah, that was rough.
It didn't go well.
It didn't go well, but
at least 3 people died.
Yeah, I know that my paladin did.
My bard died.
Yeah, our level 20 characters died.
Well, as 20th level characters say, resurrections is just a spell slot, anyways.
Yeah, that's fair. Sorry.
That's fair.
You know what? I was thinking about that the other day, just on Friday, because I realized that the situation with Oswald is something that my previous character would have been like, I have to fix this.
Would have just cast Wish.
Yeah. Or got to the point like I did before where I waited until I could. And then I was like, okay, now I get to go fix all the problems that I feel like I caused.
It is a benefit to lower level play, especially, is the permanence of a lot of forms of tragedies or even just inconveniences. Right now, the possibility of you reviving Oswald is very difficult. You're already outside of Revivify.
Yep.
By the time you reach a major city, you'll be past Raised Dead.
Yeah.
And so you have access as a dungeon master and as a player to causing some very serious and long-term effects on the world if you succeed or fail in ways that involve death. You also can't, because you don't have access to higher level magics, you also can't affect the world in as obvious of a way. You can't fell mountains and fully alter the map. And I think it proposes a different challenge for players. But one day, we are going to see some world-shaping abilities. Maybe, though, by that point, all of these current players will be dead, and player characters will be dead.
I guess that's the thing that I sometimes think about. You're playing in a campaign, maybe my character dies. Great. 2 sessions, 3 sessions, a month, 2 months goes by, something like that, another player dies. Over time, I guess that's a Ship of Theseus argument too. Like, how many PCs have to be killed off before you aren't running the same party anymore?
Well, you've brought in a religious argument now about dungeon master or campaign ideologies.
Yeah, that may be a bit big for today.
There are a lot of, so I will say, there are a lot of arguments in this, especially in very specific cases, that a total party kill can end a campaign. Now, there's two kind of schools of thoughts that I can see both ends of this part. If all of you were to die, let's say hypothetically, you were to attack a giant who was asking you to pay the toll for crossing the bridge, and that giant, in response, fully killed the whole party. we'd have to have the very real moment where we thought about what comes next. Luckily, the fight was balanced. Realistically, that sort of event would be the dice would have to really hate you. But, so, this is fun because I get to kind of point and steer footnotes. Victoria, Amanda, were you the dungeon master and all of the players were to have died at this point in the campaign? What do you think should happen next? Do you end the story and go bring yourself into a new one? Or do a new group of adventurers discover this mysterious painting and see what happens next?
At this point, and this would be from the I've DM'd before and I don't want to throw away my notes, I would definitely want to bring in people and like say, okay, now, you know, maybe guide some of the player decisions, and whenever it comes to character creation, and say like, now, you know, we've talked about before, why are we all trying to go do this one thing? This party doesn't have the same goals that our characters originally had starting, so...
yeah, we would never find Chester. Chester? Oh, man. He went to Malibu, which is very confusing.
Very weird. Dream Beyond the Blue Veil? I don't remember this.
Dreams Beyond the Blue Veil.
So for me, it would be, okay, now why would this group of adventurers know each other and also come across this abandoned wagon and find this painting and da-da-da-da-da? You know, really a lot of different motivations for that party, but I would want to do it that way. Now, my point originally that I want to, after Amanda, go back to was over time, every party, not TPK all at once, but over time, every party member. But go ahead with your idea.
I would say I would probably make the painting and all of that be a side quest that your new characters come across later. Maybe that's not what starts them in Elks. Maybe they're already in Elks.
Yeah.
And then somebody else mentions this painting comes in later, and it just gets woven into the story that way. There is a baby coming over here.
Oh, wow.
She was requested, and thus she appeared. Summon Coco is actually a cantrip available to all people who are followers here in the chat, so, well, there you go.
Oh, no.
Now, I will say, there are in-universe... if you ever want to continue a campaign, I believe, at the very least in the early stages, there are ways to continue. As a very off-the-cuff hypothetical, in Elves, it would be possible that perhaps a small band of Volcar, the Knights of Elves, were to arrive and discover this enchanted painting, taking up the mantle to discover who created it, who killed Oswald. But I don't think necessarily we're going to experience the TPK in the next at least 2 sessions.
Yeah, it can be hard, I think. I don't know. The concept of self-preservation, too, as a player. Like, I started out with a character previously who was very much like, if my friends go down, I'm running. I'm not sitting there trying to save people. And that changed over time.
Sure.
But right now, I have a character very motivated, not by self-preservation, but by I have a specific task.
If Elle went down, cry.
Cry. Or, blow things up now that I've gotten a little bit stronger. But
oh, no.
I know, right? Very wonderful. I love being a wizard now. But that motivation that everybody has, that self-preservation instinct, I wonder about our party, if Thorn goes down and Silas goes down, for example, or Gwynwyn goes down, like, would other people in the party just take a hike and just, like, start bolting away from wherever the fight was?
I think she wants you. I'm so sorry. Or she's trying to get to her mama.
I think she wants mama.
Thank you.
Well, I can't say for the other party members, but I know Gwynwyn is very much against losing any of her friends.
Yeah.
And so she would be very much to stay and try to bring back friends.
Ooh, our dear friend Jurassic Rules actually brought up an interesting point here. They've made some D&D monsters of their own. How do you all feel about homebrew monsters? As you know, a lot of the times in our setting, we do sometimes use rules for monsters from the monster manual. A lot of the times we'll have some adjusted abilities. Individual numbers may have been tweaked beforehand. How do you feel about... Oh my gosh, is she freaking out?
She's trying to get onto the table.
Oh, yeah, well, I'd want to walk on the table too, but I'm not allowed to.
You're not allowed to walk on the table. Sorry.
Well, see.
Not allowed.
Now, how do you feel about, either as players or those of you who've run games before, as a DM, about using custom monsters?
As a player, I really like custom monsters. Gives you some more variety. I know that there are a lot of monsters, but at the same time, I feel like you wind up with the same monsters over and over again.
It's true. It's hard to, if you want to go attack a goblin village and you don't want to, let's ignore for a moment some of the wonderful third-party publishers like Kobold Press. Yeah. If you want to go attack a goblin fortress, you've got like 7 stat blocks. Mm-hmm. You don't have, so you have, and that's assuming we're not doing any adapting from the whole point. So you've got goblin, you have a goblin chieftain. I believe in Volos we got a couple more goblins as well. Mm-hmm. You don't have a lot of options.
There's new options also coming out, but it's very much, you kind of got certain flavors of fights.
If you want to have 5 separate encounters in the goblin fortress, there's not a way to have those all. There's within reason. By having custom monsters, those can all feel very mechanically unique, and still having the flavor. Also, even without using fully custom stat blocks for you DMs out there, you always can take a stat block, say the Gladiator, one of the many humanoid NPCs in the back of the monster manual, and take that Gladiator and flavor those humanoids as a number of other races. You could have your goblin, the head goblin warrior wielding a swordfish as a gladiator. You can do what you want depending on the silliness and the setting you're in.
And just hand them different weapons. Your stat blocks may say they have a short bow and a short sword or whatever. You can say, oh no, this guy's got hand axes instead of a bow, or just like mix it up a little bit, because all those weapons are in different books. You can find those resources and kind of maybe make a goblin band slightly different. Mm-hmm. I also have to say, as a player, as a DM, still pretty new to it. Don't really feel like necessarily creating my own, which is why I say I use new weapons. I say, you guys have got this now too. Or instead of, you've got something else.
Sure.
Kind of for fun.
You don't have to make, so there are DMs who like to do, there's different amounts of prep. As a dungeon master, you don't have to be a big prep DM. If you prefer full improvising, that's fine. I'm a big pre-prep. I love to make different sections of the world and flesh them out, because it's being fun. But making minor changes to a stat block can fully transform it. If you were excited to go to the elemental plane of ash, for example, you can make a relatively minor change to the fire elemental, giving it a smoke screen ability, or based upon the drow darkness as an example. And there, you have now an ash elemental. Yeah. You don't have to do anything big and complicated. You can kind of take things like Legos.
Yeah, and just kind of slot things in, because everything has been balanced to a degree by the game designers. They've gone and they've made these things and decided, okay, this is what works for the power level in our game, and kind of the CR balancing that exists. Also, I know we've talked before about hit points too, it tells you what that hit dice would be, what you'd roll to get it, and then it gives you the average. And adjusting that too is something that we've talked about
before you have your encounters, one thing you can do is a very easy way of making a custom. I have found custom experience. Yes, I have found running tables of 5, 6, and actually in one instance 7 people.
That was fun.
We've had a bit of a benefit by what is called maximizing hit dice. So Wizards of the Coast and other publishers will take and give you the formula for the exact amount of health that the monster has. Now, the health value you normally see is the average. It assumes that you've rolled about mid on each of its hit dice. But by taking that little formula, you can generate a higher form of that monster without adding any real complexity besides multiplication.
As a player, not as a DM though, I love custom monsters. You created some amazing things that we got to fight.
We had a lot of. We did have a lot of monsters,
right? But it was so much fun because everything felt so tailored to what we were doing. And I know that I've run stuff before, and your setting is defining what's there. So wolf packs and vampires and stuff popping up out of the woods is going to feel tailored to that experience too. But it felt very fun to be like, no, there's no information about this monster out there. You can't go ask somebody else at another table, hey, how'd you beat that thing? Because it's not something that other people have seen before.
It's true. It's kind of like how running a homebrew game that is not based on a campaign module. There's not a strategy guide to look up. We actually have before I go to my other fiddly rule, we actually have a specific example of an extraplanar fiend that we created in the past. So
is this the Godzilla thing that came and attacked us?
Oh, we'll talk about the kaiju a different day.
I have problems with it. I love it so much. Good problems, meaning that I love it too much.
The Abyss, one of the outer planes in both the Forgotten Realms, Galarian, and actually still in our setting, is this horrible, evil place with all sorts of demons and monsters. And during one adventure of our last campaign, I created a monster known as a Yottlgurt, a horrible, sputtering, many-eyed, many-limbed thing. And sort of a fun thing about that, from a DM perspective, was that what happened in the fight, rather than using this knowledge that you may have from Tolkien, if I said that a Baelor attacks you and you happen to know what a Balrog is, you have a small idea of what it is. Some basic concepts here. But with a fully custom monster, there were players, they very much got engaged with the mechanics of their sheet that allowed them to discover world building, knowledge checks, asking for skill checks that allowed them to learn about them, and also using even your environment there to test what was possible.
Yeah, because we didn't know what we could possibly do to hurt it. It was a very strange encounter in that part. Yeah, that was fun. Thank you for the DMs that make the fun sounds. I basically just have 3 voices and a couple different cadences.
Do we also thank DMs who make wings by doing this behind them?
Yes, we do. It's really fun when you have that custom character and you as a player go, I have no idea what to do with this, because you feel what your character is feeling. You're like, I have no idea what to do right now.
After playing D&D 1 through 20, and I fought goblins, bugbears, werewolves.
Oh
whatever.
my!
Yeah, goblins, bugbears, and werewolves. Oh my! But once you start doing these things, you learn what they are, and as a player, you've got to turn off that metagaming portion of your brain, because it's like, oh no, my character wouldn't have studied anything about this before. I wouldn't have this knowledge.
You don't necessarily know the basic abilities of a Beholder, Otyugh, or Illithid.
Right. It would be like, maybe I've run into goblins before. We started at level 2, but it wouldn't be that I know, like if a dragon landed in front of me, I wouldn't know specifically necessarily what to do with it, right?
Or Hydra use fire.
Right. We wouldn't know that. So there's this, and the metagame knowledge that you don't want to just say, oh, well, okay, this thing doesn't, mind-affecting abilities don't work on it. I can't charm this. I can't hurt this with fire because it turns out it's immune to fire for some reason. So it's hard to turn that off. And when there's these custom monsters, you don't have that ability whatsoever.
On the other side, there was a point later in the campaign where both Yottlgurts and other custom monsters, in that instance, specific forms of custom humanoids, the soldiers of the Whispered Army, you learned in character rather than by opening a monster manual or by having watched popular media. You learned the strengths and weaknesses, and eventually were strong enough to take on things far above your average party level, far above the challenge rating you should be punching at.
Yeah. It's
ruined
fun.
My day.
It's also fun, too, once the party starts to kind of click and we all kind of get to understand each other's characters more, that ability to plan ahead and kind of strategize. Again, our table before, very bad about following through with the plans, but we would sit there and try to come up with what can everybody do. And actually, that brings me to a D&D pet peeve.
Oh, do tell.
Ooh.
I personally don't like to talk numbers at the table necessarily.
Ooh, this is a fun one because there's some people who really enjoy that, and there's actually some game systems that pretty strongly require numbers.
Yes.
5e doesn't require it.
Right. It's the idea, I guess it kind of comes down to how we talk whenever we're talking in character. Right? Because whenever we're saying, like, if I'm talking as is meaning, I'm going, okay, so who here is good at tracking? If we're at a table where everybody's usually talking, not saying that Jimmy will go do this and Jimmy would like to walk up to the bar and order a beer. If we're doing like, I'm going to go and talk.
We play in the first person typically.
Yeah. If we're playing in the first person like that, then saying I've got a +5 in survival or whatever kind of can be a little bit of like a take out moment. And again, there are systems where you have to say your numbers, or there are times where it makes more sense to do that. But when we're kind of like in that flow of, I'm ducking down in a bush, like, can somebody help me track this cardinal or whatever, then I don't want to necessarily talk specifically what my numbers are.
Amanda, how do you like to, for you, if someone across the table is looking for someone to solve some task and you're really good, how do you like to tackle that?
I agree. I don't like saying numbers necessarily because it does kind of take you out of the moment. I'd rather say like, I'm really strong with puzzles or something, or like, I'm very bad at tracking things, don't ask me.
Right.
My knowledge of Arcana is limited.
Right. And I know that it can be very That's contentious because we all do it too. Like, I know that I've said the numbers at the table, even though it's not my favorite thing to do. I know that.
Because it's easy to just be like, I have a +2.
Right.
I would like to mention that we had Jake triumphantly join in on the chat and faceplant with a typo. And though none of you other wonderful people will ever be judged for such a thing, we will, of course, relentlessly harass our friends.
Thank you, Jake. Hello.
Love you, Jake.
But yeah, no, I know that we always try. I know that we try, and that's the thing too. Is that it's
Oh, you do a phenomenal job. Numbers will come up.
Yes.
But it's so much more common for people to ask, is anyone comfortable going to go do X, some task, and people talk, either talking about, I've practiced this, I did this back at Anton's arrest.
Well, Amanda said something interesting.
Ooh.
After the session.
Ooh, do tell.
I believe it was after the session where you mentioned that you were doing checks that are just like, I don't know.
Oh yeah, we had the not very wise character make the animal handling and the medicine checks.
That's true. You weren't trained in the things that you were doing. You did a fine job.
Yeah, you did.
But
I wasn't rolling well, so I was like, maybe I'm just cursed. I'm not going to try to help.
Yeah, you got real Colvilled on the last.
Was it Jazz who sat on your dice, or was that on Claw's dice?
Claw's dice. But yeah, I thought it was really interesting because we were just like, yeah, Gwynwyn will take care of it. Gwynwyn knows what she's doing. It's all good. And then like after the session, like, yeah, no, I'm not good at those skills. I thought that was fun too because I could see playing a character that's just like, yeah, I'll try it.
Gwynwyn's very much like, she's kind of oblivious, but if you hand her something, she's like, oh sure, I'll do this. Fully expecting to fail.
I love it. I absolutely love it.
Failed forwards. Did you get that from your master back at in Anton's Gambit?
I think that was from Mama. Mama was just like, try everything.
Oh my goodness!
Supportive
dwarven moms.
Supportive dwarven moms are a theme.
That's why she keeps cooking, even though she's very bad at it. Because her mom kept telling her, keep trying. Eventually, you'll get this.
I love that so much. It's just fun. It's really fun. Also, because of the kind of characters we've played in the past. You came in, you were playing a paladin, I was playing a bard. We did our little mini-series where we had this, big event in history. I played a paladin.
Oh my gosh. And she played a bard.
And you played a bard. And then, come to find out, my paladin was your sister-in-law.
Yep.
So from that little mini-series that we had done, and my character, the bard, was so interested in the stories being told by your bard that we kind of created this little loop where like I'm sitting there in session and
I hadn't considered. I ran those sessions. I helped you make those characters, but I hadn't considered that you flipped.
Right, but then we get further on and we find out that you are my character's sister-in-law, and that was a surprise for all of us because you never shared your last name and character.
Nope.
And so we all were stunned, and we go and we meet your daughters and your grandkids, and there was little Nyasa, and I cried. I had to turn off my mic.
For some clarity here, originally Victoria played. The first thing that happened was so we had our dear lady Jeswyn Lakoth. We had Nyasa here. And then we had little baby Nyasa, and little baby Nyasa, because you guys saved her in that last campaign, she's still kicking and hanging out, paladining it up.
Kevril paid for her to go on the expedition.
He did, and so now we won't see everyone. Not everything that happened in the previous campaign will show up, but there are a couple characters that I'd love to see as we go through the adventure together. I know there's some people that. Players here at the table, some of our friends who've been kind of supportive and listened to us gush about Dungeons and Dragons the past few years.
All of the time.
They have some questions that they want answers for. Maybe here. Oh, yes.
Oh, so I was just going to say, speaking of last campaign, Calvert? Oswald from Calvert?
Oh my goodness.
You did that to us?
Ooh. Yeah, for those of you who want some secret Footnotes lore.
Yep.
We had our dear Oswald who... he sadly died. There was nothing I could do. It's truly tragic. The villain did it.
The DM is always the villain. Remember
DM
kids.
is the villain.
That's unrelated. What I did reveal a little bit to our dear friend Jake was that Oswald actually was an incredibly minor NPC from our previous campaign. He wasn't someone that you'd write home about. A lot of dungeon masters, like me, will If your player's asked to go, I want to go pick up some baked goods from the town, you might generate a name here. Oh, you head over to the Cappleberry Bakery, and it's a little boy working.
I can promise you we probably made
and his
fun
name was Oswald.
Yeah.
It was a bit of a pull, but luckily I had a massive bit of notes and a lot of free time.
Yeah, it's so... And
I was actually...
we aren't from Calberth. We can't share any of the lore.
Calberth itself was the primary city and sort of base building and headquarters for the Guardians. It's an important place up north and was somewhere that our players are all very intimately familiar with.
But our characters all know nothing except for Al.
You want to go to Calberth sometime?
No, let's not go to Calberth.
Let's not go.
No.
Yeah, let's not go to Calberth. It's a silly place.
But the other thing too is the building up of Calberth was something that you missed because of the time you came into the campaign. It was very interesting doing the base building because of the stuff that we latched onto.
What do you enjoy
rates?
about? So there's and this is a balancing act I had to make because from where I'm perched, it kind of seemed like everyone got something different out of having a small city that they grew into a barony, that you developed a castle. What parts of that sort of system interest you, both in Calberth and maybe in a future place? What are you interested in about building a secondary, like a base?
It's like, because I kind of saw the final product, right? I got to see Calberth in its final production.
You mainly helped with training the army.
I heard a lot from Chloe about the education and providing free education to everyone because she was very, very, very vocal about that.
Yeah. Everybody was learning
Free healthcare, free healthcare and education was her
for an entire
big
barony.
initiative.
Yeah, love it.
And so I kind of like to see how that argument began.
Oh, that was fun. We all kind of... Okay, well, the first argument was actual days long, and it was over taxation.
I can already hear Chloe yelling about this right now.
There are so many Excel spreadsheets.
We went really deep.
I could see Chloe going nuts about this.
But then what happened basically, the end of all of those conversations was we all had basically a stipend based off of how much we were bringing in, what we were doing to improve the area.
Now, for players, I would like to clarify something. As I mentioned, I love to do a bunch of things behind the scenes. Dungeon Masters don't make your players do math. I ask some questions, like concept questions. Hey, what are your projects you're interested in developing? And then I did a bunch of math in the background and said, here's how much money you get to put in your pocket, and here's the story blurb about what happened because of your efforts.
Right.
Maybe some dice rolling, actually a lot of dice rolling, but over the course of 2 years. But even if we do base building, we allow it to be complicated. It gave you mechanics and army and story hooks. I really want to emphasize, don't put that load, unless your players want to, don't put the load on your players' shoulders.
We did a lot up front, and then we got to the point where we were weirdly strapped for cash, so we made some adjustments.
You had a lot of projects.
Right.
People kept asking for more and more.
Right, and we ended up being to the point where it's like, we can't afford to do these things. Like, we've got to cut some stuff. So
I think the airship cost a lot of money. With a lot of
You
that.
did invent an airship. Where's that airship now?
I'm sorry.
Nobody crashed it into something, right?
Yeah, we crashed it into a
Who
building.
crashed it? Who? Now, okay, I know who actually did it. Whose decision was it to crash that into a giant tower?
You know who you are. You know who you are.
Boy.
But yeah, no, it was fun to have that city building. From my perspective, though, the way I see this campaign going, I guess, or kind of like my desires would be, maybe, I don't think one of us is going to become a baron again. So, or more,
Elf is quite small to have they don't have nearly as large of a noble population.
But kind of some of the things that I want to explore, and in a campaign where we're kind of going to a location and feel like we'll be for a while, is kind of like a hideout mentality is what I've got in my head, where it's like, I'm going to fortify...
Is this because they're remaking Diamond and Pearl and you're excited about the secret base mechanic?
You know that I didn't play those games.
No, but I know Amanda did.
Yeah. Yeah.
The underground.
But I like the idea of like fortifying a basement at an inn that we're paying a little bit of extra money to rent out, basically.
Win-Win wants a lab.
That's not going to happen in a basement in an inn. But the idea of...
Let's put explosive chemicals in an enclosed space beneath another building. I, for one, support our new Boom Boom Overlords.
Nothing would possibly go wrong with this.
I'll practice fireball, you'll make bombs.
It's safer to let Gwynwyn have a lab, however, than it is to let her have a kitchen.
True.
That is true, actually. Very true.
Canonically, now we did... You have, I believe we gave you disadvantage on cook's utensils checks because you're just the worst cook.
Yeah. She overspices and oversalts everything. Just does not pay attention when she's cooking, and so she just keeps dumping in spices.
Like me.
No, it's a shaker. You don't unscrew the top. You don't know.
But she will always offer to make dinner every night.
She does offer. She's very kind. Her sweetheart and very, very, very defective brain. Well, do we have anything else here for footnotes? I know I have lots of things I could say, but I think I would mostly just be spoiling future secrets of the campaign. Yeah. And nobody wants future secrets.
I could go on for like 3 hours about base building, so...
And dwarves.
And dwarves, yeah.
And artificers.
I think we're going to keep going back to that every time we have you over. It's just going to be...
That's fair.
You know, let's talk more about dwarven culture. You want to talk about food? We can talk about the diet.
We don't have a Vander to salt our food anymore.
That's true. We don't have a Vander to oversalt the dwarf's food.
Not yet. Now, I do want to thank you. Thank you so much, Amanda, for joining us here and for playing an artificer. I'm not saying one of the least played classes here. You've brought to us a fun mix of magic, quite resilient, especially after this most recent level up. Mm-hmm. And I would say pretty clearly one of the more dedicated support characters.
Very much. Especially alchemy artificer is very support heavy. Like mine at level 3, I feel fine sharing this. I get to make elixirs now.
Ooh, these elixirs. Are you going to ruin my day?
Yeah.
Okay, that's... Yeah, I guess I did ask for that. But I'm very excited to have you here. If you want to learn more about the Artificer, highly recommend checking out the Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. It's a wonderful book. Do we have one?
Haha. We got.
The subclasses and class, the class and subclasses presented here are great. If you've read Xanathars, and it's sort of I know it's not official, but I think of Xanathars as sort of D&D 5.1, and this is 5.2, is adding a good chunk of content, a lot of options here, and I'm excited for what comes next. I wouldn't say the new book that's coming out is the same sort of thing, but it's definitely something that we'll be getting when we can get our hands on it.
Yeah, the Tasha's book, it's just so much in it. You know, it came out and everybody was like, okay, let's see what all is in there that I want to take. But it's like with Xanathars, you go through it and you're like, okay, here's 85 spells. Not really, but 85 spells I'm going to pull out of this and they're all mine now. Mm-hmm. New stuff's fun. I love new stuff.
I love new stuff too. And I think this is where we're going to end our footnotes. I want to thank each and every one of you. We just got started. This is the end of our first month here on Twitch. First time we've ever really done streaming. And all things considered, this has been an incredibly successful September. We really appreciate all your support. Yeah. And we hope we'll see you this Friday for our next session.
I'm so excited.
All right. Thank you so much, guys. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye. Hang on, we got to do finger guns.
Finger guns.
Finger guns.